Many of the greatest popular songs started their lives in Hollywood movies or Broadway shows, but have gone on to find a place in the public's affection as musical standards in their own right. But that journey to classic status wasn't always necessarily straightforward.
You dare to dream really do come true.
Since the turn of the century, the professionals of Tin Pan Alley had been turning out pop songs to fill the theatres of Broadway and beyond. These vaudeville revues would mostly be little more than showcases for the songwriters' talents, the most efficient way of getting songs in front of an audience. But some of them would last forever.
Like the beat, beat, beat of the tom-tom when the jungle shadows fall. Like the tick-tick-tock of the stately clock as it stands against the wall. Like the drip, drip, drip of the raindrops when the summer shower is through. So a voice within me keeps repeating, you, night and day. You are the one, only you, beneath the moon and under the sun. Whether near to me or far, it's no matter, darling, where you are, I think of you. Night and day, day and night.
Cole Porter's Night and Day started life in the 1932 Broadway production of The Gay Divorce. 2 years later, the show, renamed The Gay Divorcee, transferred to the Hollywood screen, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
The storyline is pretty flimsy, and it's rather ironic in a way that sometimes modern musicals get castigated for having dodgy plots, and indeed they do. But the plots of the 30s and 40s were often ludicrous in comparison.
You know, you take any Astaire Rogers movie, and there's a ballad for Astaire, and then there's a dance number for Astaire and Rogers, and then there's a dance number for Rogers, and maybe a comedy number for Eric Blore, or one of those people, and everything was tailored to the stars just the way they tailored them in New York. And you can take any ballad out of any Astaire Rogers picture and put it into another one. In fact, you can take any song. Very rarely are the songs written for any specific situation.
Broadway was giving way to Hollywood, where the real money was. The studios realized that it was easier to buy the writers than the Broadway shows. So Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, and George and Ira Gershwin were commissioned to write songs for the movies, as were the team of Lorenz Hart and Richard Rodgers.
I don't think anybody ever had more fun writing music than my father did. People loved to think that my father got up in the middle of the night and raced downstairs in his pajamas to write something. In fact, he never wrote except when it was very logical, usually in the morning, when he was dressed and sensible and wrote very quickly. And I don't think he ever thought it was hard work writing. He just loved it.
Rodgers and Hart wrote at a time in the 30s which was youthful, witty, sophisticated, and the musicals were then called musical comedy. That is to say, they really were a kind of a hybrid story without very much depth or characterization, so that the songs really were the stars.
Rodgers and Hart tried to fit their songs into musical comedy's simple plots, or books as they were known on Broadway. In the case of My Funny Valentine, they hit on the idea of creating a character called Val.
They wrote the song, and they liked it. They thought, oh, this is a good song, but how can we link this into the show? I suppose they were thinking, it was the beginning of thinking, gee, the book really ought to make more sense than these books have been making, and so let's make more sense. So they changed the name of the hero to Val, which nobody was going to mind. It didn't make any difference. So.
You're my funny Valentine, sweet comic.
Vocal coach Marnie Nixon was the singing voice of Natalie Wood in West Side Story and Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady.
The rise and fall is da-da-da-da-da-da. And the tune, My Funny Valentine, it just all goes together, so it sort of falls out of your mouth.
Yet you're my favorite work of art.
Sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart. And if you would speak it, you make me smile with my heart. You know, so it has that kind of flow. You can see where the sentence is going.
Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable, yet you're my favorite work of art.
Daddy wrote the music first most of the time when he was writing with Larry. But if you're going to write You Make Me Smile with My Heart, and the music has come first, the genius is really that Larry figured out that that was a note that needed to have the important word on it, because that's the high note, and smile is a very good singable word to use, open sound. And that's Larry, you see, because he always wrote the lyrics after Daddy wrote the music.
It's a beautifully, beautifully made song, and it is as clever and as simple, deceptively simple, as anything in Schubert. And also it's great to have a love song which is so dark, and also so sort of rueful and thwarted. But that, you know, what happened there, you had a great little musical idea married to the hopeless, doomed romanticism of Larry Hart.
It was the unrequited love that he was so good at. Unrequited love's a bore is one of his lines. Nevertheless, that's what Larry probably felt all his life, and that message always came through.
Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak when you open it to speak? Are you smart? But don't change one hair for me, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine, stay. Each day is Valentine's Day.
In Hollywood, the studios had discovered an audience for musicals. Seduced by the security of a motion picture contract were Broadway veterans Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg. Beating off strong competition, they landed the plum job of writing the score for MGM's The Wizard of Oz. Based on the legendary children's series of books by L. Frank Baum, it was the most expensive movie the studio had ever attempted. The production was beset with problems from the start. The first Tin Man was allergic to his makeup and had to be replaced. The Wicked Witch's broomstick caught fire, putting her in bandages for 6 weeks, and half the Munchkins were arrested for being drunk and disorderly. There was even last-minute confusion over the lead role. Initially slated for the infant darling of Hollywood, Shirley Temple, the part of Dorothy eventually was passed to the young Judy Garland. The studio had wanted Jerome Kern to write the songs, but as fate had it, he wasn't available, and Yip and Harold got to put the words on Judy's lips.
They'd finished the whole score for the movie Wizard of Oz, but there was no great big ballad, and Harold just felt they needed a big song for Judy Garland, and so he couldn't think of a thing, and he gave up and he asked his wife to drive him out to, they were going to go into Hollywood to see a movie.
He went for a ride. He says to his wife, Anya, that they should go to see a movie at Gross Chinese Theater. And as they were going by Schwab's drugstore, he then says to Anya, stop, I just must jot this down.
She stopped the car, and a melody came into his head, the first few bars of what we now know as Over the Rainbow. He called Yip Harburg, the lyricist, and he played it for him, and Harburg said, I don't like it. He said, that's not a song for a little girl in Kansas.
Harburg thought it was too operatic for the show, and it was too sort of almost hyperbolic, they couldn't agree on it, so they called Ira Gershwin over. Ira Gershwin had gone to school with Yip Harburg. They were best friends.
Ira was famous for not liking to do ballads. He liked rhythm numbers. So I think Yipper felt this will work for my side of the bargain now. And so they went to Gershwin's house and on Roxbury Drive. And they went in and Harold played what he had of Over the Rainbow. And Ira said, that's a great tune.
And so Harburg bit the bullet and said it.
Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I?
Of course, the problem with Over the Rainbow was that the studio people didn't want it. They felt when they had a preview the first time, they said it's too slow. And also it's filmed in a barnyard. There's nothing glamorous about a barnyard. And so when Harold and Anya and Yip went to the next screening, it was gone.
And when he went to the previews of the movie and the song wasn't there, he was extremely disappointed. And he said that he would never, ever go to another preview again, and he never did.
Arthur Freed, then, who was practically the director of the movie, went to the front office and said, you got to put that song back in. It's really great. Freed argued to the point where I think he threatened to quit. So the song went in, and as everybody knows, it won the Academy Award. So Harold was right.
Here we go.
But Arlen and Harburg's innocent song of hope was to take on a more adult meaning as American troops entered the Second World War. It became an anthem for soldiers overseas dreaming of going home. Judy Garland's yearning interpretation had a poignancy that also seemed to predict her own tragic life, which would end in a fatal drugs overdose.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's the land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
The song has sort of developed this strange half-life out of the context of the musical. It's so much become a sort of theme tune to Judy Garland. Mark Doty, the American poet, described Judy Garland very memorably as an amalgam of glamour and damage, which I think is fantastically accurate. And also that song is the theme tune for an amalgam of glamour and damage, it seems to me.
If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I?
By the end of the war, the American public was looking for more grown-up entertainment. And when Lorenz Hart, Richard Rodgers' first collaborator, died, he teamed up with Oscar Hammerstein to create a series of more adventurous musical dramas.
Rodgers and Hammerstein, when they collaborated, the real star of the show was the story. And all the music was geared to telling a story, not to sort of being essentially a vaudeville show with a little bit of narrative thrown in, you know.
was Hammerstein who introduced the idea of what you might call Tin Pan Alley songs, forwarding a story. He was combining operetta techniques with Tin Pan Alley, that is to say, with the popular song.
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain, and the waving beat can sure smell sweet when the wind comes right behind the rain. Oklahoma, every night my honey lamb and I sit around and talk.
Every syllable seemed to further the plot. Truly integrated show. And it was wonderful. I mean, it changed the whole face, the whole nature of musical theatre. And therefore, a lyric writer suddenly became a dramatist overnight. He wasn't just writing love songs. He was, you know, taking the role of playwright.
It's all right with me.
But songs from the new, richer narratives of Rodgers and Hammerstein were less likely to become standalone hits outside the shows they were written for. Oklahoma was the first in a long line of successful collaborations between Rodgers and Hammerstein. Over the next 20 years, with shows like The King and I, South Pacific, Carousel, and The Sound of Music, they appeared to dominate the stage and film musical. In 1957, Broadway would be challenged by a whole new approach to the musical. A young composer, Stephen Sondheim, was signed to put lyrics to the cold, tragic world of Leonard Bernstein's fractured score.
I remember when I first heard the West Side Story stuff, Steve had just gotten the job as lyric writer, and he would come over and play me Lenny's, and I said, that is so ugly. I was reacting just the way people must have reacted to Stravinsky when they first heard Stravinsky. I was completely unused to hearing anything like that. It was pretty amazing stuff at the time.
There's a place for us, somewhere a place for us. Peace and quiet and open air wait for us somewhere.
There's a time for us, someday a time for us, time together with time to spend, time to look, time to care, someday, somewhere.
That's a tune that Leonard Bernstein had tried to get into every show. He'd written it back, you know, in the early 40s. And nobody would bite. Actually, somebody, I think as a joke, or maybe he as a joke, wrote one that went, there goes, what's his name? Unhappy, what's his name? I don't know whether it was serious or not. Might have been. And anyway, he never got into a show, but he finally got a sucker to put in a show. That was me. Well, you take a tune like that, you can't set it with anything gracefully anyway, anything but one-syllable words, because there are so few notes in the melody, which is one of the reasons he'd never been able to get a satisfactory lyric for it. Well, somewhere is no more satisfactory than there goes what's his name. A friend of mine used to refer to it as the song. There's a place for us. Where's the accent? On the What's the high note? On the You know, it's a silly, not a silly lyric. I don't want to say that. It's a lyric that's very self-conscious, and it doesn't sing very well.
I think Stephen Sondheim as a lyricist is a kind of interesting one in a way. I mean, I know that he rather distances himself from, or doesn't really describe it as a great achievement in his career, but I think it is, actually. I think West Side Story is a fantastic musical. And Somewhere, I think, is a very interesting song, harmonically. I always think of it as like one of those rides at the fair where you sit in a little bucket seat and that spins round on an arm and then that spins round as well. It's full of these strange little circular circuits and revolves that are happening within the context of bigger ones. And then it pushes off into this. When he actually sings Somewhere, you enter a kind of new tone world, a new sound world, a new narrative world too. It's a beautifully made song, I think.
There's a place for us, a time and place for us. Hold my hand and we're halfway there. Hold my hand and I'll take you there. Somehow, someday,
The most successful songs of a spiritual vein, like Somewhere in West Side Story, are ones that are not site-specific. They don't just have to take place in West Side Story. And I think they become the property of the world.
Meine Damen und Herren, Mesdames et Messieurs, Ladies und Gentlemen, Fräulein Sally Bowles!
This was Sally Bowles in the early 30s.
I dash all day and I work late at the cabaret.
But when a song becomes the property of the world, it can be stripped of all the meaning it carried in its original context, as the writers of Cabaret found.
Cabaret is not the jolly song people think it is. It's really a song sung by a woman in great despair who's about to have an abortion. I mean, when it's sung, most of the time it's sung like a really entertainment song, but it's not. It's a song of anger and despair, really. I've always thought that she really decides to have the abortion in the middle of singing that song.
What good is sitting all alone in your room? Come, hear the music play. Life is a cabaret, old chum. Come to the cabaret.
I don't think Sally walks out there with her fists clenched like this. I think she starts off singing like a cabaret singer, and as she, this is in my head anyway, as she sings, she gets angrier and more frustrated. And
that's one of the uses of, I used to have a girlfriend known as Elsie, because it builds within that.
She's telling
the story of her girlfriend, who apparently led a life of, dissolution and being, she wasn't what you call a blushing flower. As a matter of fact, she rented by the hour. The day she died, the neighbors came to snicker. Well, that's what comes from too much pills and liquor. But when I saw her laid out like a queen.
This is where the music starts to change. Pills and liquor, go on.
But when I saw her laid out like a queen, she was the happiest corpse I'd ever seen. I think of Elsie to this very day. I remember how she turned to me and say, now she's getting a little sore. What good is sitting alone in your room? Come, hear the music play.
Life is a cabaret, old chum. Come to the cabaret.
I don't think the people who sing those songs are gonna make it.
Oh, I do. I think when she sings it, she thinks she's going to make it.
But she's not, but we don't think so. That's what I'm talking about.
I don't know. You know, you can't walk through the audience and hand out questionnaires. I wonder what they're thinking at any particular time. All I know is what I'm thinking. And what I'm thinking is Sally, who's the dunce of all time and the romantic idiot of all time, really believes it's going to be all right.
Oh, I think,
and I think a lot of our women believe it's going to be all right.
I think both what they believe and what we as a listener believe are two different things.
See, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, this is a revelation because we wrote all these together in this room, and I don't think with any of those songs ever believed that things were going to work out for those people, and Fred may have.
Yeah, I know.
In 1973, another character song was about to enter the canon of classic show tunes, and it too would be much misunderstood. Hal Prince's production of the new Stephen Sondheim show, A Little Night Music, was 3 days from its opening, and still there was no song for the leading lady.
There's a scene in the second act between Desiree, the second-rate actress, and her lover of a long time ago. And he says to her, "I can't lose my feeling for this young bride of mine," and so he regretfully takes his leave.
And Hal said, "I'd like to know what you think about this woman and what her emotions are at this point, where my character is having to face getting older and losing her man." And we ad-libbed the really vital scene, emotional scene for them.
The scene hadn't been changed, but somehow you felt you wanted to know what her reaction to him was, rather than knowing his feeling, what made him want to leave. I had started to write a song for him, and so I abandoned that and instead wrote a song for her. And that's it. It came very, very quickly and easily. I wrote almost all of it in one night. And having seen the scene, it's a great help when you see the actors perform a scene to know what the song, or to feel what the song should be.
At 10 o'clock the next morning, when we started rehearsal, and Steve put his hands and played the first chord. And my eyes absolutely brimmed. I was absolutely choked, like I am now. And I looked at Len, who is not an emotional person or doesn't show it, and his eyes were filled up too. We knew the first few chords. Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, you in mid-air. Send in the clowns.
She has a small, very silvery, very musical voice, and a very little sustaining power. So I wrote it in short phrases. And that, in fact, suggested questions to me. The fact that I knew I was going to have to write in short phrases, it suggests questions. So the lyric is built on questions. So, and also, I deliberately picked notes that would cut themselves, words that would cut themselves off, like rich, isn't it rich, which is not a word you can sustain. You can't go, isn't it? In fact, the singers who go, isn't it rich, are not only missing the point, but they're trying to sustain on a closed vowel, and it always sounds unsatisfactory. But if you hit the word, isn't it rich, it's much more effective, and that's what Glennis did.
Just when I'd stopped opening doors, finally knowing the one that I wanted was yours, making my entrance again with my usual flair, sure of my lies, and no one is there. Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? It's that the thought that goes in. It's like modern art. It's not the object itself, but the space around it that sometimes defines what you're saying. And his melodies and his lyrics are so wed together. It's almost like they have to be done the way they're set up on the page. That doesn't mean that you have to, do them personality-less or anything, but you find the essence of the song by, like Mozart, by what is musically correct becomes dramatically correct. You find the character through the song.
Isn't it rich? Isn't it queer? Losing my timing this late in my career. And where are the clowns? There ought to be clowns. Well, maybe next year.
But I still get letters from people saying, what does that lyric mean? I don't understand why people don't understand it, but I've had letters all during the years from people who say they love the song, but they don't know what it means. And in fact, I even remember Frank Sinatra, who after all was responsible for making it a hit. He was asked in an article what the lyric meant. He said, I don't know, I don't care what it meant. Look, you meet a girl, you take up with her, you leave the girl, send in the clowns. He had no specific idea of what it meant. We just knew that generally what it meant.
Though successful as a stage show, the movie of A Little Night Music bombed. It seemed audiences were losing faith with musicals. The rock counterculture was now dominating the music scene, and a new generation of writers were abandoning the old principles of musical theatre.
I got my brains, I got my ears, I got my eyes, I got my nose, I got my mouth, I got my teeth, I got my tongue. Jesus Christ, superstar, do you know what they say you are?
With Joseph and Superstar, we thought, well, stuff the rules, stuff what Richard Rodgers did, brilliant though it was. Let's write what we like. And we were both rock fans, and we said, let's write what we would buy if somebody else did it. We couldn't get a theatre deal for it. Nobody was interested. So we were forced to go onto record. Rather reluctantly. We thought, well, it's not really the way to launch a show. But it was brilliant, because we had to make it shorter. We had to do it in 80 minutes or something, because we had 2 vinyl albums. And this made everything more concise, and all shows are too long. And we ditched the book, because you cannot have people talking on a record. People wouldn't play it more than once. It would be excruciatingly boring. So we made the whole thing operatic. And we thought, well, we can always stick a book in later if anybody ever wants to stage it. But of course, the operatic format of it was one of the things that contributed to its success.
Have to know, I'd have to know, my Lord. Have to see, I'd have to see, my Lord. Have to see, I'd have to see, my Lord. If I die, what will be my reward? If I die, what will be my reward? Have to know, I'd have to know, my Lord. Have to know, I'd have to know, my Lord.
If we'd written Superstar for theatre, if some foresighted or far-sighted producer had said in 1968, yes, this could be a hit, I'll give you this theatre, we would have got the old band in, and it would have been pretty ropey. Even with the same tunes and the same lyrics, it would have been rather old-fashioned, and it probably would have run 4 weeks in Plymouth, and that would have been it. But because we were doing it on record, we thought, well, let's get a rock band in. We want to make a great record, so we might get a hit single out of it.
I don't know how to love him, what to do, how to move him. I've been changed, yes, really changed. In these past few days, when I've seen myself, I seem like someone else.
That tune was around well before Superstar was written. We'd had a go writing different set of lyrics to it. It had been a pop song. We were trying to get it launched as a pop song. We couldn't. It was a great tune, but the lyrics I did were terrible. And it was very hard for two unknown writers to get a ballad to any artist of importance. And it wasn't good enough because the words were awful. But the tune was obviously strong, and we wanted our score, Andrew wanted his score to be a full variety of exciting rock, but still have some great tunes, theatrical type tunes if you like. But the original recording of I Don't Know How to Love Him is rock. It's a ballad, it's a corny, sweet ballad, but the instrumentation on it is rock.
I never thought I'd come to this. What's it all about?
I would never have come up with what I think is a good line, I don't know how to love him, and a fairly original way of saying I love you. But if you have a situation in a story with a character, it's often much easier to come up with an original lyrical idea because you've got a real situation. Put Mary Magdalene in that position in a very strong story with this incredible character, Jesus, and she doesn't know he's God, she just thinks he's a remarkable person. Then you've got, the lyric almost writes itself.
I'd turn my head, I'd back away, I wouldn't want to.
The potential of Jesus Christ Superstar was quickly spotted by showbiz impresario Robert Stigwood, who took the property far beyond a mere album. Rice and Lloyd Webber's work more closely resembled classical opera than the Broadway musical. All the dialogue was sung.
He could see the cross-pollination, I think was the buzz phrase at the time, of all the different media forms. He could see that something like Superstar could work in record, film, stage, concert, and it didn't really matter because the piece was strong enough. He could sell it in any one of these formats, and they would feed off each other.
Now Stigwood went even further. His next project bypassed the stage musical altogether. He commissioned a film script on New York's underground dance scene and teamed the story with a band he managed called the Bee Gees. It created the best-selling soundtrack album of all time, Saturday Night Fever.
Ultimately, what dictates when you're using the song is the fact that it sounds like a hit rather than it works with the film. And I think a lot of the older writers wrote for a film, you know, in the old days, before Fever, wrote for films that fitted with the film. Where here is a situation where you're a song, is it a hit?
Many of the greatest popular songs started their lives in Hollywood movies or Broadway shows, but have gone on to find a place in the public's affection as musical standards in their own right. But that journey to classic status wasn't always necessarily straightforward.
You dare to dream really do come true.
Since the turn of the century, the professionals of Tin Pan Alley had been turning out pop songs to fill the theatres of Broadway and beyond. These vaudeville revues would mostly be little more than showcases for the songwriter's talents. The most efficient way of getting songs in front of an audience. But some of them would last forever.
Like the beat, beat, beat of the tom-tom when the jungle shadows fall. Like the tick-tick-tock of the stately clock as it stands against the wall. Like the drip, drip, drip of the raindrops when the summer shower is through. So a voice within me keeps repeating, you, night and day. You are the one, only you, beneath the moon and under the sun. Whether near to me or far, it's no matter, darling, where you are, I think of you. night and day, day and night.
Cole Porter's Night and Day started life in the 1932 Broadway production of The Gay Divorce. 2 years later, the show, renamed The Gay Divorcee, transferred to the Hollywood screen, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
The storyline is pretty flimsy, and it's rather ironic in a way that sometimes modern musicals get castigated for having dodgy plots, and indeed they do. But the plots of the 30s and 40s were often ludicrous in comparison.
You know, you take any Astaire Rogers movie, and there's a ballad for Astaire, and then there's a dance number for Astaire and Rogers, and then there's a dance number for Rogers, and maybe a comedy number for Eric Blore, or one of those people, and everything was tailored to the stars just the way they tailored them in New York. And you can take any ballad out of any Astaire Rogers picture and put it into another one. In fact, you can take any song. Very rarely are the songs written for any specific situation.
Broadway was giving way to Hollywood, where the real money was. The studios realized that it was easier to buy the writers than the Broadway shows. So Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, and George and Ira Gershwin were commissioned to write songs for the movies, as were the team of Lorenz Hart and Richard Rodgers.
I don't think anybody ever had more fun writing music than my father did. People loved to think that my father got up in the middle of the night and raced downstairs in his pajamas to write something. In fact, he never wrote except when it was very logical, usually in the morning, when he was dressed and sensible and wrote very quickly. And I don't think he ever thought it was hard work writing. He just loved it.
Rodgers and Hart wrote at a time in the 30s which was youthful, witty, sophisticated, and the musicals were then called musical comedy. That is to say, they really were a kind of a hybrid story without very much depth or characterization, so that the songs really were the stars.
Rodgers and Hart tried to fit their songs into musical comedy's simple plots, or books as they were known on Broadway.
So when you walk out of that theater, it happened to us on Flashdance. The kids walked out of the theater, because a lot of theaters are in malls now. You go right to the record store and buy the album. In that case, in 1 hour on a Friday, every single album in the country was sold.
I mean, sometimes you think that the raison d'etre of films like Footloose or Top Gun or Flashdance is, they're not interested in telling you a story. It's not about a narrative. It's this kind of stringing together of marketing focuses, I suppose. It's the single, it's the video, it's the doll. You sometimes think that the actual narrative idea of the film is secondary to that.
It seemed hard-nosed 80s commercial interests had finally killed the all-singing, all-dancing Hollywood musical. But something was stirring in Tinseltown. The animated movie was making a comeback, and at its heart was musical storytelling. Disney had hired the Broadway composing team of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken to bring the secrets of the golden formula of the stage musical back to the cinema.
Tale as old as time, true as it can be. Barely even friends, then somebody bends unexpectedly. Very sing-songy. Musical theater is a very specific vocabulary. When Howard and I wrote Little Mermaid, people looked at that movie, whether they knew musical theater or not, and knew there was something else going on other than simply an animated movie with songs. Those people who knew musical theater knew that Howard and I were really translating our way of writing stage musicals to the animated film. Somewhere in the first 20 minutes of an evening, you're going to want to have the moment where your protagonist expresses what it is he or she wants. And part of your world, yes, is the classic I want moment. Look at this stuff, isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete? Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has everything? Look at this trove, treasures untold, How many wonders can one cavern hold? And she wants to be part of your world. She dreams of that.
I want to be where the people are. I want to see them dancing, walking around on those, what do you call them? Oh, feet. Flipping your fins, you don't get too far. Legs are required for jumping, dancing, strolling along down a... What's that word again? Street.
You need pretty early on in every story of a life at the setting out of the ambitions. And the I Want song usually does that. With Lion King, it was I Just Can't Wait to Be King.
I'm gonna be a mighty king, so enemies beware.
Well, I've never seen a king or beast with quite so little hair.
I'm gonna be the main event, like no king was before. I'm brushing up, I'm looking down, I'm working on my roar.
Thus far, a rather uninspiring thing.
Oh, I just can't wait to be king.
There is no doubt that some of the best scores of the 90s were written for animated films, for cartoons. And it worked because the whole world of animation is unreal anyway.
It does give a kind of whole new lease of life to the musical form. But because it's animated, because it distances you from realism, it does allow more imaginative room. Because it isn't like us, it's different from us, and we accept that somehow.
With the cinematic success of The Lion King, a miracle happened. Successful Disney stage versions of both it and Beauty and the Beast brought the musical full circle. The story and characters of the new animated movies were right for Broadway because, in a sense, that's where they'd come from in the first place. The world of the musical had come a long way, but not really traveled that far. But what a journey, and what songs it left us on the way.
And a lullaby.